Hi guys, I'm back to read Polaris again with you guys. Hopefully we'll get through this book, if not this week, which I think we should get through it this week, definitely by the beginning of the next week, and we can pick a new book to read. And this one is, again, written by Michael Northup. And when we left off, if you remember, they had found the creature that was living down below. A scientific inquiry. They spent the next few days patching the ship up as best as they could. The first priority, the hatches. The heavy junk they'd layered on top had been washed away by the storm, and there was plenty of broken wood around now to nail them tight. "And stay down there," Aaron said after driving home the last nail in the forward hatch. They got to work mending the top gallant sail Emma had gutted, and beyond that they improvised. By the time they were done, the sail was patched up with penniless giant socks. There was a stout rope where the railing had been, and there was no more scrap wood covering the spots where the cannons had torn loose from the deck. Not very handy. Henry had helped out where he could. Mostly that had involved fetching tools. He was at least well qualified for that, having taken inglorious shelter in the little tool shed for most of the storm. It was only later, after being battered by the buckets and hammers, that he learned that the loose cannon had missed the little shed by mere feet. And then, of course, there were endless turns on the chain pump. After that, he was tired and all as any of them when he finally crawled into his hammock that night. And yet, sleep took its time finding him. It wasn't his uselessness during the storm that bothered him. He had gotten a bit better on board, but even the cannons hadn't been able to stay on the deck during that storm. No, what was haunting him was haunting all of them was the bizarre creature that they had seen below deck. Or was it a creature? Two things in one. On this topic, he was no longer the least qualified person on board, and now, tired but sleepless, he bent his scientific mind toward the question. What had he seen? A creature with the body of a large insect, the face of a boy, and the scent of something else entirely. He remembered the sickeningly sweet odor that had emanated from the creature's human-like mouth, and the quick sight of the fuzzy white tongue glowing in the light from above. Could it be not two species in one, but three? He wanted to dismiss the idea, surely. Such a thing was impossible, but he could not dismiss his own eyes, his own nose, and how many times had the old doctor told him, "You are a scientist." Now, and a scientist's senses are the first and best instruments. And so he allowed himself to trust his own observations. What might those creatures be? 6 legs and ending in hooked claws, an exoskeleton, antennas, an insect certainly, all the hallmarks of order Hymoperta. But perhaps he could be more specific. The physical resemblance was too strong to ignore. Family, Formicade, the ants. Without allowing time to second-guess himself, he moved on quickly. What else? The face of a boy. A face he'd seen before, even if only passing. Human, plainly enough. Or it once had been, at least. He shuddered and moved on. The last one seemed trickier. But once again, he found that he already knew the answer. He retraced familiar ground. There was much in nature that sweetened its stink. Overripe ripe fruit or rotting flowers, carnivorous picture plants, or nearly anything rotting away in the damp light and the lightless conditions. But this was his area of expertise. He was a botanist assistant, after all. He had stuck his nose into just about anything he had ever encountered that had even thought of blooming. In everything from botanical gardens to vegetable plots, from pristine labs to primeval forests, some of those specimens had even fought back. He'd received several bee stings, had nasty bouts of both poison oak and ivy, and even had one Venus flytrap closed quite firmly on his nose. And so, in his expert opinion, he had his third culprit, fungus. He thought, to the first time, he smelled it, and how he felt most certain. Mold could also be sweet and stinkier, but there was the yeastiness of a scent to consider, and he had new evidence, a flash of white fuzz. He'd seen such a thing before, a pale, fibrous sort of fungus. He'd seen it growing on fish, mostly, but the tongue seemed as close enough cousin to the wet fish. He made up his mind. A fungus, then. But how? A much larger question grew in his sleep-fogged brain. How? How could three separate species be reconciled into the shambling monstrosity he had seen? Certainly a fungus could infect a living host. He followed that thought. Hadn't he read something in his preparation for the trip, little more than a rumor based on the field notes of a French botanist? He chased the thought through the darkness in his hammock, swayed in the ocean's motion beneath him. He was so sleepy. Yes, he thought, no longer struggling to get to sleep, but rather to stay awake, to complete the thought. It had been a young botanist, just out of Sorbonne University in Paris, looking to make his name with a trip deep into the wild Amazon. There he claimed to have observed a fungus infecting ants in a most disturbing way. The fungus already growing within them, the ants had stumbled homeward, where the fungal spores had blossomed and wiped out the entire colony. But with all that moisture and the sun and the shade and the rainforest had plumped up the Frenchman's notes with dozens of exciting discoveries. The fanciful tale of the predatory fungus had earned but a few lines amid the loving descriptions of its towering trees and exotic flowers, each more impressive and magnificent than the last. In fact, it had been those tales that Henry had hoped to hear more of. And where is this Frenchman now? He had asked Dr. Weatherby. Will he come to Boston, do you think? Perhaps to Cambridge? Weatherby had looked up from his reading on the Amazon, always a book or three ahead of his apprentice. Not likely, he said. That man is quite dead. It had surprised Henry then, because the man had been so young. It did not surprise him now. He tried to remember those few cryptic lines. The fungus had preyed on ants, but just regular ants, the kind that were the threat to picnics, perhaps, but not to people, and it had killed them quite efficiently, if he remembered correctly. He wasn't sure, and couldn't reconcile any of it with what he had seen. But then there was so many varieties of funguses, an entire world unto themselves, really, down there among the dirt and the leaves, and there was so very much that science still didn't know. He fell asleep taking him. His eyes refused to stay open, and his limbs were weightless and numb. And what of the creatures coating in a strange glistening substance, like a jelly or a clear white of an egg? And what of those two half-formed limbs waving inefficiently from his midsection? There were so many questions. Henry felt adrift and overwhelmed, and he realized he'd only been concentrating on the section of the larger puzzle. The other pieces floated just beyond his grasp, scattered out of place. An expedition to the jungle, the boat returning half empty, the violent mutiny, and the ship abandoned, the boy's strange disappearance, and far stranger reappearance. Sleep came and took him. There would be no more answers tonight. Nightmares replaced reason, and he was far from alone in that. All around him, the others indulged their own dark imagings in the dead of the night, conjuring phantoms that could hardly be more terrible than the real transformation that was taking place between decks. The day had barely dawned, and the crew was once again churning away furiously on the chain pump. The ship had taken on a dangerous amount of water, and the first light found the Polaris riding lower over the waves. With a full crew, they would have been pumping right through the storm. The heavy old machine was operated by a pump brake, one handle rising up and the other was pushed down to a seesaw motion. With each pump, another cupful of filthy bilge water would sputter up from the bottom of the hold below, and there seemed to be an endless supply. Working shoulder to shoulder, two of them could fit on each handle, four in all, there being only 6 of them, and one needed for the wheel. That worked well enough. The work was grueling, though, and it only allowed one of their numbers to rest at a time. But almost as soon as Henry finished his first turn, collapsing onto the deck to rest, the others were already shouting at him. "Get up!" called Maria. "It's my turn to rest." "No, it's mine," called Aaron. "You're both wrong. I've been pumping the longest," insisted Thatcher. The claim made no sense. It was a 4-person operation, and they had all started at the same time, except for Emma, who had arrived late after mending something aloft. Henry didn't waste his strength arguing. He just sat against the bulwark, sucking in as much air as he could. His chest rose and fell, rose and fell. In time, the pumping of the others, and then, as a fresh round of grumbling was directed his way, he rose too. He could have lingered a little longer. It wasn't as if the others could have come got him, but he wanted to do his part. Unlike sailing, this was a sort of unskilled labor to which he could actually contribute. All right, he wheezed. I'm up. Then he suddenly realized that he could choose who got the next break merely by sliding in to take their place. He savored his moment of power and then quickly slid into Aaron's spot. Thatcher howled in protest, allowing Maria to outmaneuver him. I'm next, she chirped triumphantly. That's not fair, snarled Thatcher. And I'm after her, called Emma. Henry's spot was next to Maria and across from Emma and Thatcher. Not that it mattered. They kept their eyes down and did their best to settle into a smooth rhythm, up and down and up and down. Henry's muscles ached so badly that he wasn't sure if he was the old pump that was creaking, groaning, and sputtering, or his own body. Even worse was the filthy brownish-gray water splashing out at their feet. Some of the cartons of food had been stored in the hold had clearly broken down in the dampness. Little bits of spoiled food came up now, and then on the round cups of the pump chain, at one point, a rat, or most of it anyway, plopped down at Henry's feet. Maria kicked the carcass away from her bandaged foot, but it was too late. Henry had already seen it and suddenly had to rush over the rail to heave up over the side. That counts as your break, said Thatcher when he got back. Half an hour later, Owen arrived. All eyes were on him. What lucky sod would get to lean against the wheel for the rest of this? But the choice was obvious. Maria's injured foot still had not been healed. And no wonder, thought Henry, eyeing the swampy muck she was standing in. She was putting most of her weight on her good leg, throwing off the rhythm, and making the pumping more difficult for everyone. Henry watched jealously as she headed toward the wheel, limping slightly. Then Owen started pumping, bigger and fresher than the others, and throwing off the rhythm in a whole new way. Settle down, you big dumb ox, Emma called over. Owen just smiled and pumped harder. They went on like that until breakfast. Well, I don't think we'll sink, said Owen as they washed up a bit in the ample water from the once again overflowing scuttlebutt. But at least not today. But we'll have to keep this pumping up, full shifts until we reach port. Emma just replaced her sister at the wheel, and Henry looked down at Maria's bandaged foot. There was a splash of red among the old brown stains. You should change that wrapping, said Henry, and wash that wound. Maria shrugged. It'll just get dirty again. It'll heal soon enough, you'll see. Henry wasn't so sure. Was it so swollen the day before, he wondered? Aaron went to fetch the cooking pot from the little shed, passing one of the boarded-up hatches of the process. Be careful, Henry called out after him. The others followed Aaron's progress carefully as he passed the hatch. There was a clang as he retrieved the pot from the shed and the ringing of the dinner bell. Henry pictured a boy's eyes snapping open just below, a boy's eyes on a monster's body. He remembered the thorn barbs on the ends of the 6 twitching limbs. He looked at the thin, mismatched boards covering the hatch. What good were they against such a thing? With mealtime upon them, they retreated to the quarterdeck. Once one of them had to be back there at the wheel anyway. There's still too much water below deck, said Owen as Aaron set up a little metal cook stove midship. We can only get some of it with a pump. I can practically hear it sloshing between the decks. We need to get down there and bail. And patch the leaks, said Maria. And tar the hull, said Emma. Henry stared into the distance, watching Aaron work the tinderbox to start the fire, coaxing fat sparks out of a hunk of flint and a wedge of steel. But we're not going to, are we? Said Maria. Go below, I mean? Owen grimaced. I suppose not, he muttered. But we will begin the next storm already halfway to the bottom of the sea. It had become painfully obvious that no one truly believed the creature had been killed, nor did Henry. Where was the body? Where was the blood? We need to get off the ship as fast as possible, said Thatcher. This time, his tone wasn't angry or argumentative. His voice was quiet and flat. He was merely stating a fact. Owen didn't argue. Henry considered the two boys. They weren't so different, really. Both strong-willed, both capable and reasonably well-educated. The difference was that Thatcher had turned to look to his left, where just over the horizon was the coast of Central America, was rolling slowly by. Owen had turned to look straight ahead, where over the horizon and over the horizon after that lay the southern coast of the United States. The other difference was that this boat was his family business for Owen. The silver in here belongs to my family, you know, he had said, and he could expect a handsome reward and a bright future for bringing it home. Thatcher was indentured already, sold off. What did he have to lose again or to gain? From a purely physiological perspective, Henry found the comparison fascinating, but from the human perspective, he was fairly sure it would all end badly. Okay, guys, that was chapter 19. The next chapter tomorrow will be chapter 20, A Revelation from the Deep. All right, have a good day.